I am joined as ever by my friend Richard. Hello, Richard.
Andy, good to see you, especially wearing that wonderful T-shirt that you see. I don't know whether you've got any other T-shirts other than the black and white pure, but it's a great T-shirt.
So I go to bed in it, I wake up in it, and it never ever leaves my back apart from when it stinks and walks to the washing machine, which does happen sometimes.
Nice.
There's a little image for your nose. Right, Dr. Richard Scott, a GP for quite a while. You're now retired from that, but still doing medical topic stuff.
Yes, indeed. And I've got it's vaguely medical tonight. I would say sometimes it's more medical than others. And tonight's vague. I'm going to be talking about a doctor, but not especially from the medical point of view, if that's okay.
No, that's fine. I had a question on the word doctor, though, just came to mind. I think it's a little bit less overt now, but there were seasons, especially in American TV, where Dr. So-and-so, only they're not a doctor. And it used to really wind me up. I'm just curious on your thoughts about all these doctors who use, yes, I've got a doctorate in geography, I am a doctor, but please take the scalpel and the injection away from me because you can't wield it.
They regard themselves as proper doctors, PhDs, they're proper doctors. Well, yes, it is a strange thing. And then, of course, even more strange, you get the odd medical doctor who then does a PhD. So he's doctor. But essentially, yes, I think they should. Well, I think they should be called something else because it's a bit confusing, to be honest.
Please, I had a doctor at school. It was Dr. Murray. He was a PhD in geography. I mean, he used to know stuff that, no one's ever going to care about. But it got him his PhD, got his doctorate, and he was a doctor. And I am not a mister. I am a doctor. He was very proud of that.
Well, when I was a surgeon earlier in my career, I was very proud of moving from doctor back to mister. Because in fact, surgeons are very proud of not to be called doctor. So there we go. There's an inverse snobbery there.
That's genuinely fascinating. So when you're a surgeon, you're not a doctor anymore.
Well, once you get your surgical exams, you go back to being a mister or a miss. It's just, you see, in the old days when all this took place, when doctors were proper doctors and surgeons were sort of butchers, really, and so they had a lower status. Whereas now the surgeons regard themselves as having a higher status. Therefore, they can't be called by the common and garden doctor. They have to be a Mr. or...
Oh, it's like a rocket scientist if you're a different sort of branch of physics and you see that as the lowest of the low.
Yes, indeed.
Right. Okay. Yes, lead on, sir.
Right, so, yes, well, my wife travelled to Glasgow last week, and she'd worked 3 times in India. First of all, as a medical student, then as a junior doctor a couple of times, under the care of two lovely Scottish people, Betty and Leslie Robinson. Leslie was a surgeon, and they were Scottish missionaries who'd run a Church of Scotland hospital in South India, a place called Chikbalapur, about an hour from Bangalore in South India. And so I joined her for her last trip in 1989, which was part of my training before going abroad to work as a doctor in Tanzania. And anyway, subsequently, the Robinsons retired home for retirement. Leslie then died, but Betty's still alive. And Heather travelled up to see her for the second time with her friend Caroline. They'd both been to work in India, Heather 3 times and Caroline just once. And of course, to take Betty out, because what Betty really wanted was a curry. And apparently they're good in Glasgow. I haven't been to Glasgow yet. Well, Glasgow's well worth going to, so top tip. Anyhow, while they were there, they'd heard about the David Livingstone Museum. And when she came back, not surprisingly, she enthused about it. I remember, Andy, you were saying, "Oh, I'm not sure about David Livingstone, so this is your chance to learn, if you like."
I don't know who he is. I can't think. I know the name.
He's a very famous Scottish missionary. Interestingly, my son-in-law, I was talking about this, and he said, "Was he a Labour MP?" I said, "No." He was a Scottish missionary. That's by the by. But it reminded me when she said, "Oh, yeah, went to the Livingstone Museum." I'd read a book some years ago aimed at enthusing young Christians, and it was called Heroes of the Faith. And it included well-known heroes, Mother Teresa, Martin Luther King, Hudson Taylor from China. But the first one was David Livingstone. So I looked him up and reread the Livingstone chapter. And it really gripped me because there was a point at the end that is what I want to bring out tonight. You see, when Livingstone went to Africa as a Scottish missionary, he had 2 initial aims and then developed one while he was out there. And the first one was this, a geographical aim, which we'll look at in a second. The second one was a spiritual aim, which was to establish mission work. And the third one was a social aim, which he discovered while he was out there, to abolish slavery. So we'll take them in turn, and we'll see why I'm so enthused about it, even though I haven't been to the museum yet because I haven't been to Glasgow, but why it really got me thinking. So here's the first one. Geographically, Livingstone is known as the missionary who discovered Africa, the greatest explorer of the 19th century, which was a tough gig, I must say. Towards the end of his life, he wrote this: "There have been so many difficulties put in my way. I'm doubting whether God is with me." But then he quotes the Great Commission: "But I know that all power in heaven and earth has been given to me to teach all nations." And God says, "Go, I am with you even unto the end of the world, under the earth." So he knew that God was with him because that's Jesus' promise in the Great Commission. But he said, goodness, it's been so tough. Now, when he arrived in South Africa in 1841, because you had to get a boat in those days, no flying, so he gets a boat around South Africa, he described Africa as like a chest of drawers, and I'd forgotten this. The top and bottom drawers have been pulled open. So if you like, the top of Africa has been discovered, the bottom has been discovered, but the middle drawer was locked tight. So some mapping had been done, but Central Africa was largely unexplored. And he was the first European to cross the Great Kalahari Desert and enter Central Africa because he wanted to solve an ancient mystery. Where did the Nile, the world's longest river, begin? If you like, where was the source of the Nile? Now, there were no roads, obviously, in those days. There were no highways. The jungle was often impassable. The only way to get through was by riverboat along the Lualaba River. And he went along the Lualaba River with his machete, thinking it would lead him to the Nile. If he could just trace it to Lake Victoria, he thought that would then open up trade, which was also important for him. But more importantly, for missionaries to then bring the gospel to millions of Africans who'd never heard of Jesus. So we know he was involved in opening up for trade, but his particular desire was to open up for missionaries. So this is his ideas. Geographically, I want to find the source of the Nile. Number two, missionaries then have a better chance of reaching the lost. But number three, in 1871, so this is 30 years after he'd been in Africa, there he was traveling north along the Lualaba River, when suddenly there was a huge commotion, and he'd come across Arab slave traders who killed many Africans, captured the rest, and then marched them to a place called Unguja, which I've been to in Tanzania, and then shipped them an hour across the water to Zanzibar, from where they were transported across the rest of the world. Now, having worked in Tanzania, I've visited Dar es Salaam many times, ironically now known as the haven of peace. It certainly wasn't in those days. And Zanzibar, three times, including a rather sadly named place called Bagamoyo, which in Swahili means the place where I left my heart. This is where slaves left their hearts when they were transported abroad. I mean, it breaks your heart even to think about it nowadays. And Livingstone described what he saw with these Arab slave traders as, I quote, "like being in hell. I'm sick at heart. This place is a den of the worst kind of hunters." Now, you will remember this, Andy. They had a famous meeting with an American reporter, Stanley, who worked for the New York Herald, who came up with the famous phrase. He met Livingstone. He said, Dr. Livingstone, I presume. Here these meeting for the first time in the middle of Africa. Stanley, by the way, timed it very well. Obviously, God timed it very well because Livingstone was pretty sick at this point. He also was running out of food. He needed provisions. Well, Stanley brought the provisions, and they did quite a lot of exploring together. But Livingstone did confide in Stanley that as a missionary, he'd not been very successful. In 30 years in Africa, he had only one convert, and even that one wasn't an especially good one. I'm coming to tonight with my talk. Now, just before we get there, in the slave trade, the weak or young were often left behind when their parents were taken. And Livingstone came across this 12-year-old boy who was dying, left behind. And before he died, he said, "I have a pain in my heart." And Livingstone knew that this pain couldn't be cured with medicine. He said the strangest disease he came across in Africa was broken-heartedness. This is what happens to free men when they become slaves. They die of broken hearts. And he saw his most important job as healing these broken hearts. So he had to stop the slave trade. That meant persuading the British government to capture slave ships. But first, he had to change the attitude of the government, their attitude towards Africans. And this is where Stanley came in really helpful when he went home, because Livingstone gave him journals and letters for the government and his friends back home in the UK. So Livingstone says goodbye to Stanley, never sees him again because Livingstone then dies 2 years later in 1873. Here's the point that gripped me. Why am I talking about Livingstone? I mean, amazing story. Please check out his life. It's just a great story. And I've only touched on it. But when Livingstone was mortally sick, he must have believed that he'd failed in all three of his objectives. Geographical, the source of the Nile, he still didn't know it when he died. Number one, unanswered. Mission work, there were no missionaries there apart from him when he died. He must have thought that his missionary work had failed. And Arab slave trade wasn't stopped when he died. Yet, within 5 years of his death, 5 small years, all three were sorted, all due to his pioneering work. He'd mapped vast blank areas of Africa. Then his friend Vernie Cameron traced more of the Lualaba River, which would lead to the River Congo. And then Stanley would soon confirm, because he went back to Africa, the source of the Nile was in fact Lake Victoria. What about the missionary areas? Another area in which he thought he'd failed. Well, new mission societies were started and popped up all over Central Africa very quickly. And in 1876, just 3 years after his death, the slave market at Zanzibar was effectively shut down due to another of Livingstone's friends, John Kirk. Some failure. And my book, the book I was reading, states rather wonderfully that he'd accomplished more through his apparent failure than most men do through their success. So I'm reminded, Andy, of Hebrews 11, 13 to 16. This is where I'm going to get you to do some work. So on your phone, if you wouldn't mind, Hebrews chapter 11 and verses 13 to 16, please.
My phone is not behaving.
Oh, I've got a paper Bible here. Would that be useful?
Possibly. No, it's working now. I couldn't get into my phone.
Oh, jolly good. It's just nice to hear your voice. Hebrews, Hebrews chapter 11.
I had a Bible just next to me earlier on, but I moved it unhelpfully. Hebrews chapter 11.
Verses 13 to 16, please.
There we go. Hang on. It's coming. 13 to 16.
Yeah.
All these people were still living by faith when they died. They did not receive the things promised. They only saw them and welcomed them from a distance, admitting that they were foreigners and strangers on earth. People who say such things show that they are looking for a country of their own. If they had been thinking of the country they had left, they would have had opportunity to return. Instead, they were longing for a better country, a heavenly one. Therefore, God is not ashamed to be called their God, for he has prepared a city for them.
Thank you. And Hebrews 11 is the famous chapter of faith that it goes through. If you can't remember, listeners, check it out. Just some of the wonderful people of faith in the Bible. But often they did not see what their hearts had longed for, but they were preparing others to see him after them. And of course, the people in the Old Testament never even saw Jesus. But Jesus was coming and they were preparing the way for him, with John the Baptist, the latest and last of the great prophets just prior to Jesus. And it struck me that, like David Livingstone, these people in Hebrews 11 didn't seek human fame. They didn't seek glory and they didn't seek political power. They were humble servants who achieved great things through faith in our God. And that's why we remember them to this day. Now, this wonderful book, Heroes of the Faith, this is why I enjoyed reading about Livingstone again. These great men and women of our times, from the 1800s onwards. These people, we don't read about them because they're in need of our praise. We read about them because we are in need of getting to know them. There's so much we can learn. And I think my learning point, really, which I learned and I'm passing on today, is this: failure and success are human constructs. David Livingstone got it right. He worked for God and for him alone, and so should we. And of course, I'm sure, when we're all up in heaven, we can look down. Maybe Livingstone, I don't know how God works it, but maybe Livingstone's able to look down and think, oh, look at the Congo now. Oh, look at Central Africa. Oh, look at the Kalahari Desert. Oh, look at the Arab slave trade. Look at what's going on, And I'm sure God will be saying, well done, good and faithful servants. But we mustn't measure our faith. Yes, by success and failure, because that's not God's measurement. We measure, I think, our faith in terms of, have we been obedient to God? And that's what matters. And Livingstone was, and that's what we're called to do.
Yeah, and I like the way you put it. It's a social construct, it's a human construct of success, because we see success as one thing, but the widow's mite came immediately to mind because in modern parlance, she had a couple of halfpenny bits from the 1970s. She chucked it in the offering and thought, well, that's all I've got. I'm good. That's it. Nothing more. And well, it's useless. That's terrible. That's rubbish. And yet the person who gave the 50 billion quid wasn't cared about because, well, that's only a portion, and she gave everything. And that's where it's interesting how we see success, because we see the rich businessman in that particular account of scripture. We see the widow who has virtually nothing, but she gives everything.
And Jesus saw it.
Yes.
And he pointed it out to the disciples. Look at that widow, that poor widow. He saw it. He saw what she was doing. And he would have seen what Livingstone's doing. And I think for us, it's lovely when we have some success. And we do have some success at times on this earth, but an awful lot of what we do. Certainly, I think of all the patients I've spoken to in general practice, and the vast majority of them, I don't know what's happened to them in terms of faith. I haven't seen them again. Others I have seen, and they just don't seem to get it. But just occasionally God brings one my way and says, yeah, here's a bit of encouragement. I have a lady called Susan who's been coming to our church, who's had all sorts of problems in her life. And I don't know whether she's got it yet, but she's putting in herself to understand, who Jesus is and was and always will be, because she's come to church. And that's an encouragement to me, as well as I hope an encouragement to her.
Very much. I just think it's fascinating how we view success. I've been looking at listener figures and reader figures recently from the magazine and the radio, and I've always been quite clear. I don't look at the data. I'm not desperately trying to get the biggest station or the biggest magazine circulation. That's not what we're about ever, and that doesn't sound like much commercial sense. Our magazine is freely available online. Why? Well, that's insanity. We should be charging for that. Well, not necessarily, because success isn't necessarily having the biggest circulation of magazines or the greatest numbers of listeners or in the most countries. Actually, as I've been reflecting recently, which is interesting timing-wise from what you just said, I've been reflecting more about the success of what we've done in terms of we're actually providing a pure choice. And we're actually doing that. We're actually providing music that is free of bad language, that doesn't promote illegal or immoral stuff. Well, that's good. We've done that. How do you measure that? Well, basically, it's impossible. We don't know. We're never going to be able to, but God can.
Been saying, God has obviously laid that on your heart. This is what I want you to do, Andy. And success is obedience. I mean, if you read through all the prophets, the poor old Isaiah and Jeremiah's and Ezekiel's, this was another tough gig. They had a tough gig for their entire lives. But God didn't say, oh, poor you. He said, this is what I want you to do. And they did it.
Noah, I've been reflecting about Noah recently, because how do you know if what you're doing is good or bad? Is it right or wrong? Sometimes it's not quite as easy as you might think. You can think, well, I've got a job and pay my tax, I'm buying my food, my children going to university, I've paid for that. Well, that's a measure of success. Possibly. I've gone on a holiday. Well, did God want you to? I don't know. It's easy to do stuff when we got money, but when we haven't got money, then what do we do? How do we make decisions? And I was looking at Noah. The dude built a wooden boat in an ark. He built an ark. Then in America, Ken Ham's ministry, the name I've forgotten, which answers in Genesis, they built a replica ark. It took them 2 years with modern equipment and machinery and cranes and electrical power and, circular saws. And Noah had a hammer, probably made from wood, and a sort of sharpened bit of flint, possibly, to make it all. I mean, it's mad. And yet he did that.
Yeah, he did that. He did that. And that was his obedience. So, I don't know if that's helpful to some of the listeners tonight. I mean, it's lovely when we get success. I'm not knocking success. It's just that what we think is failure may not be what God thinks is failure. And, Livingstone said, I've been a pretty poor missionary. I've only had one convert. Well, maybe he did only have one convert, but there were thousands and thousands and thousands. And now there's more Christians and certainly more Anglicans in Africa than anywhere else in the world. And they're growing fast. Livingstone mapped the way. He was a pioneer for missionary for Christians in Africa. Some failure.
Well, I mean, again, yeah, the slave trade. We always think about Wilberforce, of course. That's the name I would always automatically think of. But there's others.
There's a specific slave trade. This is the Arab slave trade we're talking about here. And yeah, there were others. And Wilberforce, of course, did a fantastic work. There's no question about it. But so did Livingstone. Livingstone was horrified. And that poor 12-year-old boy obviously got through to him. His heart was broken. And that's not curable with medicine.
No, but it makes me think, and this is again something I've been reflecting on recently as we're coming towards 2 years of being a radio station. How do you measure success in a world where success is generally listener figures or income stream, or have you got a better car yet, or a bigger house? That's or which holiday we gone to that place now. That's how we would humanly generally measure success, but that isn't how God measures success. And as you said, it's about obedience. Corrie Ten Boom. I'm reading her book again, The Hiding Place. I don't know how many times I've read it. Honestly, it's brilliant. I mean, it's horrific, but it's really encouraging. But for success for her was rejoicing about the fleas in a room. And the reason why she could say, thank you, God, for the fleas, which is horrible, was the fact that the guards weren't coming in so they could hold church services and pray and read the Bible. Well, that's a success. Well, how can it be classed as success if she's in a prisoner of war camp? People are being murdered. She's not stopping that. What is she doing? It's useless. What? No. She's having church services and she's rejoicing in her suffering. That is a success, which is why I love reading about Corrie Ten Boom's life, because it encourages me to keep trying and to keep going.
Yeah. Well, I'm sure everybody listening wants you to carry on trying and carry on keeping going, because it's obedience. We're not here to pat ourselves on the back, but equally, I know myself over the years, I've often sort of flayed myself for, I haven't been very successful, I could have done that better. And there's no doubt there are various things in life I could and would have liked to have done better. Looking back, I'm now 65, there's things I'd like to have done better. But actually, somebody was just telling me at church on Sunday, hey, don't be too hard on yourself. God's got work for you to do. Do your work, be obedient, carry on, and don't be too hard on yourself. And God knows our failures, but what matters to him most of all is our hearts. And if our heart is obedient, then we're talking the same language.
Amen to that. So here's something we can all do off the back of everything you said. David Livingstone, I would imagine one of the biggest failings around him, not his, biggest failings around him was people not saying, well done. Thank you. Keep going. So here's something each one of us can do. If somebody's doing something good, please say thank you. Please say well done. Please encourage them. Buy them a cup of tea. Buy them a fresh pen. Buy them a notepad with a little message. Anything. But honestly, we can do stuff for other people. I launched a radio station and a magazine, of which you're wonderfully part. But that's what I've done. But everybody can do something. But just saying thank you and well done. Honestly, I mean, you've been there. I'm sure you've had a patient that said thank you. Probably not everyone.
Very nice when it happens, and when I left, I got a few nice cards. It's very nice, and it does. And I've tried to be an encourager and say well done to someone. It just really matters.
It really does. We had the odd comment from someone we love the magazine or really enjoying the radio. Honestly, I can't really begin to describe the value of that. Is so much greater than the words, because most of us we don't do that, but we could, and if we did, we could encourage somebody. And if we encourage them, maybe they could go off and chart where the Nile comes from or stop slavery in the Arab world.
There's still plenty of tasks ahead.
The world is not missing problems, is it?
No, it's not. It really isn't.
But it is replete with people, and we can make a difference.
Yeah,
I saw this the other day. Why is it that if something bad happens, we all blame God, but when a car crash kills a little girl, why are we not blaming the manufacturer? Which I think was really, really perfectly illustrating my point. We can all do something, but don't always blame God. God's given us each other to encourage.
Yeah, absolutely.
Encourage somebody. And if you want to write anything to Richard, you can do. Email always works. It'll always be anonymous, don't worry. Hello at pure247radio.org. Hello at pure247radio.org is the email. Dr. Richard Scott, thank you, sir.
Thank you. It's been a pleasure.
3 Point Pure? No bad language, nothing immoral, nothing illegal. Here at Pure 24/7 Radio, we make sure we're always 3 Point Pure. That means music without bad language and songs that don't promote anything illegal or immoral. If that sounds like something you enjoy, then support us financially so others can enjoy it too. Just head over to pure247radio.org/donate. That's pure247radio.org/donate and help us make the world a better place with our 3 Point Pure standards. Providing something for free costs somebody something, but doing nothing costs someone something too. So support us financially and let's walk together and brighten the lives of others. Everything we do at Pure 24/7 Radio is funded by your donations. Thank you.